roundtable on the subject of incentives for business integrity. A few technical remarks before we start the meeting. This meeting is organized in the form of a webinar, which means that you will only see and hear the speakers. If you want to ask a question, you are very welcome to do so in chat and questions and answers. This meeting will be recorded and then later posted on our website, so you can look at it again if you wish. It will be done only in English, so there's no interpretation. That's it in terms of the technical announcements. We very much invite you all to use this meeting and this discussion for your own needs, to be very active and to ask questions. With this, I'm very happy to invite Mr. Jeffrey Schlegenhauf, the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, to open this meeting.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to welcome you to the Thematic Roundtable on Incentives for Business Integrity. This event is the third webinar of the Pilot Global Integrity Roundtable in 2021. Our first event took place in March during the OECD Global Forum on Anti-Corruption and Integrity and looked into global trends and evolving standards on business integrity. This was followed by a regional roundtable for Asia and the Pacific that took stock of business integrity projects and initiatives. We also launched the new self-evaluation tool for corruption risk assessment processes designed to help small and medium enterprises to improve their corruption risk assessment processes at this roundtable. At all of these events, incentives for business integrity was highlighted as an important area where both governments and the private sector could do more to build a level playing field for companies around the world. The enforcement of corporate liability for corruption, mostly by OECD governments, has become a strong incentive for companies to improve their compliance programs. Today, investors, both public and private, are increasingly demanding better governance and integrity from their clients. Due diligence by multinational enterprises has a similar effect on domestic SMEs participating in their supply chains. But we're still faced with a lot of challenges. Corruption remains widespread, and many countries have yet to introduce or enforce corporate liability. Compliance officers are often struggling to have their voices heard by companies' owners and managers. And even though international standards are multiplying, creating a true culture of integrity remains a challenging task. Moreover, the COVID-19 pandemic further contributes to these challenges by creating more opportunities for corruption. Where there's a lot of money, there's always corrupt people chasing it, and by reducing resources for compliance. Today, we have an excellent opportunity to delve deeper into these challenges and to learn from each other about how to incentivize companies to operate without corruption. Following today's event, we'll have one more thematic roundtable on non-judicial remedies for bribery and solicitation. This will be on April 30th. And regional roundtables for Eastern Europe and Central Asia on the 12th of May, and for Africa on April 14th. I hope that all of you will make an effort to attend these events and to contribute to these discussions. Once we have completed the pilot roundtable, we'll develop a longer-term agenda for the OECD Business Integrity Roundtable. I believe that the roundtable will be an important contribution to global anti-corruption efforts. It will serve as a platform for better understanding, measuring, and monitoring business integrity trends around the world. It will also identify and promote good practices that can help governments and the private sector improve business integrity. The roundtable can also provide a space for the various parts of the OECD, including the Working Group on Bribery, the Responsible Business Conduct Center, and the Trust in Business Initiative, to join with partners from the OECD members and non-members, and from the private sector to work together on this important issue. I'd like to thank you again for participating and contributing directly to this work. I wish you all interesting discussions and look forward to hearing how the ideas you discussed today can help shape our future work here at the OECD. Again, thanks for the opportunity to join you for this important event. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I would now like to ask Nicola Bonucci to take over the moderation of this event. Many of you know Nicola. He used to be the Director of Legal Affairs in the OECD, which included also anti-bribery, anti-corruption work. He recently moved to the private sector, and so will be able to moderate this event using both sides of this experience. Nicola.
Thank you very much, Olga. It's a real pleasure to moderate this panel. And thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General, for your introduction. You are absolutely right. In all the meetings that I attended, both in my previous capacity and in my current capacity, at one stage or the other, the word incentives come out. But, and I think this will be one of the goals and the task of this panel, it's not always entirely clear what do we mean by incentive. What are the real incentives and disincentives that work? Do they differ across region or between sectors? Does size of the company matter? How can we further level the global playing field for companies and promote integrity for all companies, wherever they are located and however they operate? So I'm not saying that this panel should answer positively for all those questions, even though it would be wonderful. But I think we can probably try to be a bit more on a deep dive. And for that, I have to say that I'm thrilled by the number and the diversity of speakers, because they illustrate the multifaceted aspect of answering what appears to be a simple question: what drives corporate compliance? So I have 8 speakers, and for those who are listening to the webinar, we are all the 8 speakers are going to speak one after the other. I will introduce each of them, but the angles will be slightly different. So we are going to look at enforcement as a driver for compliance. Then we are going to look at investor and market demand for business integrity. Third, we are going to look at collective actions and certification. And last but not least, building integrity through supply chain engagement. Again, this issue of incentive is multifaceted, so we are not going to cover all the facets. But I think with that, we will have a much better understanding, I hope at least, after those 2 hours. So as Olga indicated, we also would like this panel to be as interactive as possible. Don't hesitate to ask questions. As I always say, there are no silly questions, there are only silly answers. And I'm not going to provide the answers, so I'm not responsible. And please interact with the panelists. It's more enjoyable for me and it's more enjoyable for the panelists. So let's start now. Enforcement as a driver for compliance. We just before we went live, we had a discussion with Olga about the use of disincentive. She doesn't like it, so she prefers to talk about negative incentive. So let's use enforcement as a negative incentive, or as the driver for compliance, which is probably a better way to characterize it. And let me first ask Fernando Dyer, Chief Risk and Compliance Officer from the Grana y Montero company in Peru, how enforcement can damage a company reputation, but also at the same time help reform its governance and provide new opportunities for a company who has faced an issue like, let's be very open, like the company in which you're working on.
Well, thank you very much, Nicola, for your introduction, and many thanks for the OECD for this opportunity to share with you my experience in Granny Montero, now with a new name, AENSA. On April 2016, Peru enhanced its legal framework to fight corruption, and new laws came in force early in 2018. And on July that year, Peru became the 44th party to the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, with all the benefits this involves. On my company side, AENSA, formerly known as Granny Montero, is a top 5 Latin American engineering and construction company based in Peru, where it is the largest one in its sector. The key points, in fact, here is that in December 2016, the company lost its biggest project ever, was in consortia with Odebrecht. The consortia had failed to close its financing plan, and Marcelo Odebrecht was already in jail investigated on corruption charges. Our company had to sell many assets to reimburse initial financing received from banks and pay contractual penalties to the contracting parties. Couple of months later, early 2017, Granny Montero had lost about 70% of its market share and market value, after Odebrecht alleged that the chairman of the board of directors knew about the illicit payments made by Odebrecht in one of the 6 projects the company participated in consortia with them as a minority interest several years before. This forced the then board of directors, the entire board of directors, the CEO, and the commercial director to step down and mark the end of the founding family controlling the company and a quick and big change in governance. The general public attorney then initiated investigations on the company, and some shareholders launched a class action. We suddenly were facing the perfect storm. Financial crisis where banks were reluctant to provide letters of guarantees and loans for our projects. Commercial crisis where customers were hesitant on negotiating new projects. A legal crisis facing a class action, and of course, a reputational crisis that seriously impacted the brand it took 85 years to build. 4 crises in parallel. At that moment, several steps were taken to reinforce our company governance. The shareholders named a new board of directors with independent majority. No executive board members allowed. The appointed chairman was a person with a long-standing good business reputation for ethics and honesty. The new board of directors issued a manifesto voting for the truth, transparency, and integrity, and started to collaborate with the local authorities' investigations. Created the Risk and Compliance Committee, who oversaw a thorough independent internal investigation led by a reputable New York law firm, and enforced governance. Hired me as the first chief risk and compliance officer, and provided my function with the resources to re-engineer the way the company will manage risk and compliance issues in the future. In this quest, my key allies for the cultural change we embarked were indeed the board of directors with a clear tone at the top, the new CEO willing to walk the business ethics packs together, and of course, and this is a key point, our international customers and business partners who conditioned their business to see a robust ethics and compliance program implemented. At that moment, some financial institutions and some international business partners were also looking for the original family members, shareholders involved in the bribery allegations to dilute their shares and to even quit as shareholders. Currently, the former board of director chairman and commercial directors are in negotiation for a plea bargain agreement, as well as the company. Our collaboration with authorities is far well underway. And the re-engineering of our compliance and risk and compliance program has proven good results. We have our compliance KPI in green, and our workforce is increasing its tone for ethics and zero tolerance for corruption. We also went successfully through 2 specialized reviews on our compliance program required by the Ministry of Justice. In a nutshell, the legal framework is critical to enforce and combat corruption. as well as the international business community that believes that leveling the playing field is of key importance. Enforcement from both sides collectively makes effective the fight against corruption. I believe international business providing support for companies going through these deep cultural changes would be always a great help for us. Many thanks.
Thank you, Fernando. Thank you both for the substance of what you said and also for keeping in the time frame that you have been allotted. Much appreciated. I think one quick reflection already to start to collectively brainstorm. I think your testimony shows how the questions of compliance are also question of good corporate governance. And what you said about the changes, not only in the functions, but also the way in which the board was composed, I think is something that we need to keep in mind. That compliance and corporate governance are really two sides of the same coin. Let me now move to the next speaker on the same theme of enforcement as driver for compliance. And this is Mrs. Titania Kririk, Chief Compliance Officer of Kevstar, Ukraine. Tatiana, we saw each other yesterday on another setting, by the way. How can international enforcement transform a company into a compliance leader that can drive integrity culture locally? So how the pressure from, let's say, the international customers that Fernando was mentioning before can change a company, and then the company then can instill further changes locally. Tatiana, you have the floor.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So actually, I'm continuing the topic which Fernando started. We also pass this way of enforcement. But first of all, I will introduce my company. I'm, as you mentioned, the Chief Compliance Officer of Kevstar. Kevstar is #1 telecommunication company in Ukraine with almost 26 million customers, internet customers, telecommunication customers, and it is the opinion leader in Ukraine. It is a brand leader in Ukraine, very well known all over Ukraine, and now becomes a leader in ethics and compliance, becomes known as a leader. But the way to become a leader in ethics and compliance was not easy and full of challenges. To start this story briefly, very briefly, our company is a part of international group, the name of which is VION. And the shares of this company are listed in US Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, and on Euronext. So FCPA is applied to our group and European anti-corruption legislation. And unfortunately, during a year, so from 2007 till 2011, the group of companies, which previous name was Wimpelcom, and probably most of you knew the name of this company, which is in the top 10 FCPA penalties, hugest penalties in the world. So during that period of time, our group, unfortunately, and as well as other telecommunication groups like TeliaSonera and MTS, they allegedly bribed the government of Uzbekistan. And as a result of this, the company paid huge penalty to Netherlands, to Dutch authorities and to US authorities. $795 million US, a huge penalty and 3 years monitorship. From one side, it was a huge damage to the reputation of the group and the same consequences which Fernando was talking about, his company and the group of companies. And from another side, it was an opportunity for our company to build a strong ethical culture, to build a an example of the world's class compliance program. And what that was actually was done during last, I may say, 7 years and during the years with monitorship. So we successfully passed this monitorship at the end of 2019. And now we continue to improve our compliance program, and we try also to impact the business environment in Ukraine, to impact it in the sphere of ethics and compliance. The mission of Kevstar is to improve lives of people, to improve lives in Ukraine. And we believe that it should be also improved in aspect of ethics and compliance. What we are actually doing, we are promoting culture during different events, conferences, culture of integrity and compliance. We participate in different organizations on integrity and compliance in Ukraine, try to be leaders in these organizations, such as Ukrainian Network of Integrity and Compliance, Compliance Club of American Chamber of Commerce, other organizations. And we also try to develop this culture within community of our business partners. Kevstar has a huge network of business partners. It's about 3,000 of them, but participating in tenders and competitions is even double of that number. And these companies pass our third-party due diligence, which is very strict. These companies try to understand our requirements and we explain them. They pass our trainings. We even developed a portal for business partners, which will be available for all companies and individuals in Ukraine soon. We will launch it this year. And then we will share our best practices. We'll share best practices of other companies. We will tell about the modern standards in ethics and compliance, why compliance is important, why business ethics is important, and stuff like that. So it's briefly about the way from the company being under enforcement and becoming a leader in ethics and compliance in my country.
Thank you, Tatiana. Very interesting also. Just I want to plant a potential question or a potential issue, which actually both works for you and Fernando. So your two companies have faced difficult times. They have changed. They have changed, and they are promoting change within the business community. At the same time, the countries in which you operate have also their own problems, and they may not have changed as much as the company. So I think one interesting point would be how the business integrity can also be a promotion for good changes in the public sector. And maybe we can, in the second part of the discussion, revisit that. Moving now from the hard way in which some companies may improve into more subtle but very efficient incentives. We operate in a market economy, and in a market economy, market can be a good incentive or a bad incentive. And I would like to explore now with the three next speakers the role of investors and market demand for business integrity. And let me first start with Gino Kula, who works in the Norwegian Investment Bank. And my question to you is, it almost sounds a bit naive, but why should you care about business integrity, and how you can promote business integrity in your investment policy?
Great, thank you, Nicola. Thank you for inviting us today. I think you are asking a really relevant question. It might be obvious to all of us, and it certainly is obvious to us as a long-term investor about why we care, but it's a question that we do get asked. Why do we care? Very simply, we care about corruption because corruption risk puts shareholder value at risk. And I think Fernando and Tatiana really made that point quite clear in their descriptions of how their businesses faced corruption risk, both financial and reputational. Let me just take a step back for those on the call who don't know us, Norges Bank Investment Management, and give you a description of the fund. We, Norges Bank Investment Management, we are responsible for investing the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. The fund is valued at over $1 trillion US, and we are invested across listed equities, fixed income, and real estate. Around 70% of the fund is invested in equities. What does this mean? For all practical purposes, it means that we own a tiny slice of around 9,000 companies, spanning every sector and in over 70 countries. We are a long-term investor for the Norwegian people. And that also matters as well. I think that Fernando really nicely put corruption risk in the framework of corporate governance, and thinking about how good corporate governance can drive long-term returns is also important to us. Let me also speak a little bit practically when we're talking about incentives. How does an investor like us, an large institutional investor like Norges Bank, how do we promote business integrity in the companies that we own? There are a few ways that we do this. So first, we have published our expectations of companies, of what we expect of them in order to address corruption risks. And these expectations are in line with the OECD principles of corporate governance. So that is a big acknowledgement to the OECD for really laying the rules as well, and we reflect them in our own expectations. Now, these expectations that we've published, they are primarily directed at company boards. And again, Fernando, I think you made this point very clearly. We, as an investor, we also need to hold boards to account. We hold them to account for setting clear anti-corruption policies. We hold them to a board for ensuring that there are relevant measures in place underneath those policies to implement the compliance program. We also expect that there are measurements in place to see how effective these policies are, that these policies are actually reducing corruption in the companies that we invest in. I'll also say that these expectations that we've published are really only the starting point as well for our company dialogues. We've been raising anti-corruption in our company dialogue since 2015. And in these meetings that we have with companies, with their management, with their boards, our purpose is in some ways twofold. So first, we want to just understand how safeguards and compliance programs are in place, how they work in practice, how they are used to detect and address corruption. We also really want to understand, and this is important, how do companies measure their effectiveness? It's for us a really important goal, and one that's harder to understand just from where the policy is and how that it's been published. Let me end with just again putting it back into the framework of incentives and disincentives, or negative incentives, as Olga prefers us to talk about. Again, very simply, for an investor, we want to invest more in companies with good governance and sustainable business models. That's fairly obvious, and we should want to invest less in companies that have bad governance and unsustainable business models. There are also cases where we don't want to invest in companies at all. Let me just describe very briefly what that looks like in terms of Norges Bank, in terms of our work on divestments. Again, very simply, the Ministry of Finance has set up an independent council on ethics. This council on ethics makes recommendations to exclude a company based on ethical concerns. And those ethical concerns does include gross corruption. Now, if a company is excluded, that means it's excluded from our universe. At the same time, we as a fund also divest from companies if we assess that those companies just have particularly high long-term risks. And the criteria we would use for corruption is this company exposed to future corruption? And also, does this company have inadequate management in place for that exposure? Certainly, incidents of corruption is an example of likely to have inadequate management of that exposure. Just to give you a sense of scale, since 2012, we've divested from about 300 companies because of these risk assessments, and around 23 of those companies we divested in because of corruption risk. And I'll stop there and wait for questions later.
Thank you, Gino. You're all very, very diligent in keeping the time, and it's really appreciated. I'm going to ask you a question that may embarrass you, not so much, but let me try. You are basically a very large sovereign wealth fund in a country with a particular ethical culture. How much are you how much far away you are from the rest of the investors? So what I'm trying to say is, are you the best pupil in town, but there is a bunch of PE and other sovereign wealth funds which are far, far away from your practices? Or do you have the feeling that by leading by example, you are also suscitating a more general movement in the investment area? And again, it's not for now, think about it. And I don't want you to mouth any of the other investment, be they private or public, but I think it's an important question if you can address it later in the conversation. So thank you very much, Gino, again. And let me move down now to an NDB, which is the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, with Chairman Q, who is an officer in the office of the Chief Compliance Officer. Chuan, where are you? Ah, yes. This is part of the game. You need to find it. It's not where is Charlie, it's where is Chuan. You are a compliance officer in an NDB, but you are also a compliance officer in NDB who's particularly well connected with the private sector, maybe more than other NDBs. And I would like to know, how can the European Bank in particular, but more broadly also NDBs, how can they play a role to promote integrity, both in your loan portfolio and through equity stakes, in a sense, following up on what Gino was saying, and also how you can interact, if I may, with other NDBs also to make the coherence of the system in place.
Right. Thank you very much, Nicola, for that introduction. And as you stated, the EBRD, we have a close relationship with the private sector because we are the MDB that finances perhaps the largest percentage of private sector financing. So unlike financing through a government, we finance directly to the private sector in order to develop the private sector. And as we've been talking about throughout this whole afternoon, we use both, the incentives and the disincentives as well in order to promote compliance and integrity in our projects. So let me just start with one that people are probably most familiar with, which is the stick and the punishment. I think many people are familiar with the fact that the MDBs, including the EBRD, we will debar and blacklist any companies that are found to have committed corruption or fraud in our projects. One little wrinkle to that is that unlike...
Sorry to interrupt you, because this is a very important point. Gino, can you confirm, by the way, that the NIB, the NIB, also joins these cross-debarment procedures?
Cross-debarment of specific companies?
Yes. I thought, I had understood that NIB and NIB applies the cross-debarment, follows the cross-debarment procedures of the NDBs. Was
So I don't know if in all cases that there's an application of cross-debarment. As I said, in terms of the companies that we exclude, there are two different types of decision-making processes for that exclusion.
Okay. I introduced confusion. Sorry for that. Sure. Go on.
No, that's absolutely fine. We do have this cross-debarment mechanism, as you mentioned, which is that our debarments will be recognized by the World Bank, by the Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and we also recognize theirs. So there's this coherence in the international system to make sure that bad actors don't get through. But a little wrinkle to the debarment is that we also include incentives in our debarment, which means we say you need to improve your compliance before you can get off the blacklist. We don't want bad actors returning to the system. I mean, we found you did it once. You may be debarred for a certain amount of time, but that doesn't mean you just automatically get back on. We need to see that you've made strides to improve your compliance. So that's sort of the stick side. On the carrot side, as you mentioned, Nicola, we both invest in companies through equity stake and we provide loans. Now, for loans, what we have done is that we have found that a lot of our counterparties in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, that it's not that they may not want to act with business integrity or that they don't have compliance in place because they've made a conscious decision, but it's that they may lack the capacity or the know-how or the awareness in order to implement these sorts of programs. And for those companies that are willing to do so, what we do is we put in the loan certain milestones, compliance and integrity milestones that the companies have to meet in order to access those loan funds. So while we may say you're going to get 100 million euros, you may not get that if you don't meet these milestones. So the first thing, do you have a compliance policy? Then you get 10 million. If you have a chief compliance officer that we agree with, you get another 20 million or something like that, so that we make sure that the money is tied to certain compliance milestones. And this has been very useful actually for state-owned entities in particular, because they are obviously subject to the state and the state rules, but we as an external actor, we can come in and sort of shake things up a bit. On the equity side, obviously, we have nominee board directors that sit on the board. And similarly, they can introduce sort of compliance and integrity rules into the company to improve corporate governance. And in fact, we give training to our nominee directors on compliance and integrity so that they're able and have the knowledge to be able to implement that. I'll stop there for now. Yeah.
Thank you, Chuen. Super interesting. Again, a question for later. I know that the bank has been expanding geographically, and I mean its zone of operation. So going back to my introduction about, are the incentive and disincentive working differently across the region? You have been focusing a lot in your day-to-day work on Central and Eastern Europe. I would be interested to hear the reaction now that you're working in a different area, in the MENA area. Are you finding differences or not between the two? And I think it would be extremely interesting in terms of the business integrity and how business react. I think it would be very interesting to hear from you. We now move to one of the most well-known acronyms, LME, London Metal Exchange. When I was a kid, I was wondering what was this metal exchange in London. I thought that people were really exchanged metal in London, and I couldn't really understand what it was about. Alice, you are working in the London Metal Exchange, and the LME has an incredible role in the area of mining and extracting. Which, as we all know, is one of the sector risk. It is one that it was identified by the OECD early on, and everybody knows that there, because of the interaction with the public sector, there are real and concrete risk. How do reputational risk provide incentive for compliance, and how can an institution like the London Metal Exchange raise standards for participating companies?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me to this panel. It's really great to see such a diverse range of companies here speaking today. So just to give a quick introduction before I dive into those questions. So as Nicola said, I work within the sustainability team at the London Metal Exchange. And just to give a bit of background about what the London Metal Exchange is, it's in a nutshell, a global exchange, and we're the world's largest market in options and futures contracts for base metals. So essentially, if we kind of put it into three key services that we offer, it's pricing, hedging, and then delivery of physical metal. So one of the things that producers need in order to join the exchange is they need to meet certain requirements. And before 2019, this was really all around sort of the chemical and metallurgical composition or makeup of the metal. But at this point, and I think it's been touched on by Ginu as well, is that we didn't have a remit before that to suspend or delist any of our brands due to, say, ethical concerns or ESG concerns. I think that sort of nicely segues us into some of the new requirements that the LME did introduce into the brand listing at the LME. And this really sort of arguably helped to raise the standards of the brands or producers that are listed at our exchange. So in 2019, as I said, after a lot of demand from our stakeholders, so that included investors, banks, NGOs, and our producers as well, so mining producers, and after a lot of market engagement, the LME released these responsible sourcing requirements. So in summary, these requirements really look at and are based around conflict minerals and the human rights side. So we worked very closely with another division actually at the OECD, so the Responsible Business Division, and built a lot of our work around one of the pieces of guidance that they've spent a lot of time on. So we sort of built on very good work that existed. So to just give you an idea of sort of the global impact and size of this project, we have just under 500 producers or brands listed at the LME, and that spans across 57 countries. So the impact of these requirements will be globally reaching. But just to say here, many of the brands are already doing a lot of great work in this area. It's just about bringing everyone up to that minimum requirement and improving the overall standard of our brands at the exchange, if you will. So without going into the requirements in too much detail, as we could be here for more than my allotted time, I suppose the main aim is really to improve the due diligence that producers are completing on their supply chains. So in plain English, improving the traceability and the transparency of their supply chains. And another aspect that is probably very interesting to listeners is that we're asking for the disclosure of potential financial crime and corruption risks under EITI. But without going into, as I said, all of the requirements, there's a lot of different aspects of the requirements that we're asking our producers for. So to tie this all together and sort of answer Nicola's questions about what will happen really if a brand or producer doesn't reach these requirements, and what are their potential reputational risks that will then provide that incentive for compliance. So currently at the LME, when brands are delisted, and it's a fairly rare occurrence, we actually don't tend to disclose the rationale for that delisting or suspension. So at the moment, the reason behind that is really to actually avoid any unfair stigmatism or stipulation in the market. However, come to the end of 2023, when these requirements that I've just talked about will come into action and all of our brands should be in compliance with them, it may look suspicious or cause a lot of speculation within the market if a number of brands happen to be delisted or suspended right after those requirements come into play. And because we don't disclose the reason behind that, obviously the market can then run with whatever rumor or whatever their thought may be on that issue. So if you look at the reputational impact of that, because we're a very global exchange, the reputational effects of that could be extremely damaging to that particular brand and to the rest of their metals as well, because a lot of our producers are multi-metals. So it may not just damage that particular one brand or shape of that particular metal, it could damage the entire company. So I suppose the long and short of it is that it's a very big motivator for our brands to adhere to these requirements to make sure that they're not suspended or delisted. I mean, to caveat all this, the LME is not planning to take a knife to its brand list. We're aiming to work with all our brands very closely and have been engaging very heavily with them. But in sort of the worst case scenario, unfortunately, delisting would be the stick, as it were, to ensure that people are in line with these requirements. But just to tie it all together, I think overall the positive effects that this will have on the whole supply chain, not just the metals industry, is great. And I think although we're sort of the first exchange to introduce these requirements, it's definitely somewhat of a trend and a sort of forward-moving requirement that a lot of other exchanges globally are introducing. So mandatory disclosures within sort of the ESG sphere as a whole. So it's a very exciting area to be watching, and it's definitely showing sort of the forward-moving market within the metals industry. But I'll pass back across to you and answer any questions later on.
Thank you, Alice. Again, a quick follow-up question for you to think about. And I wonder if you were mentioning other exchanges. I wonder if other exchanges have come to see you and learn from your experience, including on the delisting. I understand the mandatory disclosure, but I was, I have to say, I wasn't aware that you had this possibility of delisting. And as you said, the possibility doesn't mean that you will use it, but it's by itself a fairly strong incentive to behave in a certain way. So maybe if you, without disclosing, but if you can share how other exchanges have seen your experience and how much can be exported to others. So we have seen in the first part of the panel, I would say external incentives, externalities, either enforcement or the role of actors like investors, exchange, MDBs. Now we are going to look at more internally what drives a company from within, in a sense. And we are going now to look more at collective actions and certifications. Amanda, you work for the Alliance for Integrity Network, Amanda Rocha, in Brazil, and you have been involved in a very interesting project in partnership with the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture. So could you tell us more about this project? How does it work and what lessons can you draw from your experience in Brazil?
Thank you very much, Nicola, for the introduction. To contextualize, Alliance for Integrity is a global initiative to promote business integrity and fight against corruption. It is implemented by JSAT, and our goal is to raise awareness, create capacity building, and develop practical tools for small and medium enterprises. We have the implementation in Brazil. We started in 2016, and I have to share with you that the last 5 years was quite challenging because in the meantime we faced big corruption cases in the country as Lava Jato and Carne Fraca. Lava Jato was also mentioned by Fernanda in the beginning about Odebrecht and engineer sector, and had a lot of impact, especially in Latin America. But this incentive created by the Ministry of Agriculture came from the second scandal, the Carne Fraca. And this is the best practice that I will share with you today. It's not just a reaction, but also became a choice and action regarding the second scandal. So just to bring you more information, in 2017, the agri sector faced this large scandal and corruption that deflagrate illicit conduct from private and public sectors that have culminated and impacted even exportation trades, especially of meals. So as a response, the Ministry of Agriculture started the implementation of their Uncompliance program, but have taken into consideration that just take part of the internal issues was not enough. So afterwards came the decision to create an incentive public policy to foster the integrity culture in private sector. Therefore, in 2018, started the CEO Mais Integridade plus Integrity to strengthen business integrity on private sector as well. So, but took in consideration that the peculiarities and the nature of the agribusiness companies. So 3 axes were established as a criteria to be analyzed: integrity, human rights, and environment. So the companies that achieve the requested standard, they receive a seal to stamp in their product. Once they have also this reputation to recover the trust in the market, the solution from the Ministry of Agriculture was also to create something that could be really visual, so they created the stamp of the seal as well. So basically, regarding the integrity axle, the requirements in the beginning were more related to the beginners, because most of the sectorial companies didn't have the compliance as a priority in their agenda in 2017, 2018. After 3 years of the seal launched, the picture had been changed, and more companies are understanding the relevance of the compliance and the impact of not having it, especially on their reputations. So last year, edition of the Integrity Seal, and I'm part of the management committee of the seal. Besides beyond the seal and the standards, we selected also 3 best practices from different applicants, and they received also award of these 3 best practices. So, however, even with the seal of the stamp, this is an ongoing process, and it still needs some extra efforts. So, having in consideration, the Ministry of Agriculture gave further relevant steps. First, we did a partnership with Integrity and Ministry of Agriculture to adapt our compliance training to agri sector and trained the SMEs and the cooperatives from the sector. So we did one training last year. We had several participants and we could see the impact. So this year we took the decision together to strengthen even more our partnership and implement a medium-term program that we have that calls Integrity Journey that will took place in the second semester of this year. So we want to more than give tools to the companies and cooperatives, but we want to make them really implemented some criteria and standards of a compliance program. So besides these 2 levels of the capacity building and already have the incentive, the public policy, we could observe that it's a cultural change. So we do have like 3 levels of difference. The companies that are in the process, the beginners, and we do have more companies in advanced level. So 2 other levels of commitment were created by the ministry as well. One that's a prerequisite, that it's cadastro íntegro. It's like one step that companies can say, no, I want to do that. And once the companies do this prerequisite, they have to apply for the seal 2 years later. And for the companies that are in the very great stage of a compliance program, the Ministry of Agriculture did a partnership with the General Controller of the Union to join the seals Proética. That is one incentive public policy from the General Controller of the Union, and the seal plus integrity. So the companies that are in advanced stage of the compliance program, they can have the 2 seal joint also in their brand. So, and they're doing like a mix and smart mix of regulation, stakeholders, and promote integrity, bring practical tools, build the creating capacity, and also bring some digital approach as well. For this step Cadastro Integro. We have this partnership also with our application, the Integrity app, that it's also one digital tool where companies can see where they are and their compliance program, and we give content for the companies to implement it. So basically, it's really a mix-up of different attitudes that trying to give a business integrity culture for this sector that it's really relevant to the country, and it's maybe one of the most important one when you are talking about exportation. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. One quick observation and a question. The quick observation is, why on earth it has always to go through a scandal before things move in the right direction? And, you know, it's a bit sad that it's always curative and seldom preventive. And I'm saying that both for private and public, and not naming or shaming anybody. The question is to you, Amanda, is those seals that you are talking are pretty much a system of certification, if I understand well. Do you see a risk of complacency? Do you see a risk that a company which has the seal then rests on its laurel and basically doesn't, you know, is not as proactive as it should be in keeping integrity? I'm asking this because this is a big concern, you know, in the anti-corruption community, that there are a lot of people in favor of certification, but also a number of people who say, well, yes, but when you certify, you give a false sense of security to the company, and you're not maybe providing the right incentive to the company to behave, continue to behave and improve. So I rest my question, and I move to Soji. Soji, you have also, you're working for a coalition in Nigeria, which is the Convention on Business Integrity.
Yes.
And your organization, you know, we were talking about London Metal Exchange, has been working actively with the Nigeria Stock Exchange. And again, you know, the question on certification, you may want to address it during your presentation, because you have incentivized compliance certification. So first, your experience, how easy it was to work with the Nigeria Stock Exchange, and how easy it was to convince the companies to work with the Nigeria Stock Exchange. And secondly, on the certification, what is your assessment? I mean, you know, even in light of the question I just asked to Amanda.
Okay, thank you so much. Maybe I should just set the context for Nigeria, because it's a business environment in which, except you get on the wrong side of one or two regulators, no regulator really asks you how you made your money as a company. Nobody asks you. So only when you run into problems do they start to dig, with the exception of a few. Otherwise, it's just the rules of the industry or something else that they're trying to uphold. So to get the attention of the actors in the industry was very difficult. So timing was everything. When we had the corporate governance rating system introduced, or at least the idea of it, it was immediately after the market crash in 2009, when the stock exchange was trying everything to rebuild investor confidence. So they had seen that they needed something concrete, something that would give real assurance that there was change, because the overwhelming reason for the collapse in Nigeria was very poor corporate governance and a lot of corruption. That was the reason for the market crash. And so we had the timing, working in our favor, which was why we jumped in there quickly to make a proposal. And then secondly, they're searching to rebuild investor confidence. And from the part of companies, there was no longer a market from which to raise finance. And many of them started to look offshore, started to look at the UK and other clients to raise finance. And there was a pushback. And the pushback was around the corruption record of Nigeria as the sovereign, and also the anti-corruption record of the companies who were trying to raise capital. So this, many of them found they couldn't answer in a succinct way, in a concrete way, and therefore it led them to look around the same time for a solution. So a lot of them, the competitive edge to be able to raise money is what led them. For the exchange, it was the need to rebuild investor confidence. And again, the timing around the crash got everybody's mind attested to it. We have found that if you cannot cast the problem in the language of an existential threat to the participants, they don't really pay much attention to what you're saying about integrity. So we went the extra step to make sure that what we were developing was shadowed internationally, because we found that since they're trying to shore up confidence, we invited the Humboldt-Viadrina School of Governance in Berlin, as it was called at the time, to shadow everything we were doing to build this rating system and be able to issue an independent observer report at the end of it to give confidence to the world that this is a genuine effort from Nigeria. Also, we asked companies to self-select, to join the design effort. And we were looking for just a few, validated by those who are prepared to volunteer their organizations to go through the process with us. So it was these things that drove the initial uptake by the market. Then came the rules. The fact that the Securities and Exchange Commission and the other, the Nigerian Stock Exchange and other actors were looking at how to create a premium segment for the market. And we looked at the example from Brazil, which was called Novo Mercado. We looked at Novo Mercado. We saw that the companies that were listed in a prime segment based on the quality of governance did much better than the rest of the market. So the Securities and Exchange Commission then made it part of the rules that if you're going to be listed in that segment, you have to have this rating, which was the final seal to be able to get adoption. But even with that, the stock exchange then made it compulsory for everybody else and made it into a tradable basket. So all those who are in the CGRS go into this tradable basket, allowing those who have complied to have a differentiation from those who have not complied. And in the system, it's actually very simple. You have a self-assessment that we ask the companies to do because the information about the companies is really in the hands of the companies alone. And that we gave 50 marks. 10% was for the quality of the boards because, again, one of the reasons for the collapse was the poor knowledge of the directors of the reason why they were on the boards, which was another 10%. And then we have 40% reserved for feedback from stakeholders on how the company performs in practice on those governance issues. So if we found a company that declared themselves as compliant, it would trigger a compulsory review. So that gave us the ability to get into the company and look at the standard of evidence they had for claiming that they had all the requirements in place. Then we had this fiduciary awareness certification test, which the directors sat. Then we have also the feedback on integrity from stakeholders taken at random, and a final bit, which is a scoring from a blank sheet of paper by analysts who've been watching the company and its behavior, and they are able to give us an independent rating. So we then have a board made up of representatives from business, government, and civil society, and it's that board that either upholds or refuses to uphold the rating. And usually it will be based on our arguments and what we submit to the board. So if we find the company has done well in its own view and its stakeholders believe it's doing well, but the analysts are saying that it is very poor on governance, that's a red flag. So we would raise it to the board and warn the board not to issue a rating until certain remedial actions are taken. In terms of the impact, so far, we found it has raised the awareness around corporate governance. There has been a high level of participation. So of about 150 odd equities that could be considered, we've had about 80 go through the process, but only like 30 have made it through. 30 to 40 actually made the cut. And when looking at those 30 to 40 who made the cut, we saw that they were also the companies that represented about 80% of the market capitalization. And in their normal compliance, they were also the ones who would normally comply with listings, regulations, and submit their reports on time, and so on. So we were happy that we had some correlation with that. And the biggest lesson that we've learned is that it is about setting the standard, persuading companies to join a collective action. Then when they're in the collective action, persuading them to submit themselves to a review system. And if they submit to the review system, getting them to take advantage of having achieved the mark by actually getting certified. Because it's the certification that makes it something they can make some noise about. Otherwise, they can do the review and do any remedial work that is required as many times as necessary in order to achieve the standard. And when they've achieved it, they can then go through the tests and go through the process and get certified.
Okay.
So because it's not a certification, they can just qualify for. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergi. So first, let me say that if Nigeria was the only country in the world in which nobody asked how you made the money, then we wouldn't have this panel, because there would be no problem. You know, it would be only Nigeria, it will be your problem, the rest of the world would be fine. I think there are a number of countries or a number of parts in the countries in which people do not ask how you made your money. You know, I can think about some real estate in London, for example, not to name them. Second, I was really interested by both the substance, but also the process. It was interesting to hear that you were looking at examples, not of the United States, but you were looking at the example of Brazil. So my question to you is, do you see other countries looking at you and the Nigeria Stock Exchange as an example? Have you been approached? Is it something that you have promoted? And my last question, again, in the second round, is for the companies that have gone through the process and have been the certification, do you get the same result that apparently the Novo Mercado got, which is that those companies are doing better than the others? My last speaker, but by no means the least important, is Ertuğrul Onur. Ertuğrul works in Coca-Cola in Turkey, and I would like him to focus on something which we have heard throughout some of the speeches. And I remember in particular Gino talking about it, but also Alice and even Shuen about the supply chain. You know, you have the main, you know, you how a big company, how almost the example of multinational like Coca-Cola can promote business integrity throughout the supply chain, and what kind of concrete behavior it can change in the supply chain in a country like Turkey, but I'm sure that this experience can be exported elsewhere. Ertuğrul, you have the floor.
Sure. Thank you, Nicola, for the introduction. Let me start with the company because I work for CCI, which is one of the anchor butchers of the Coca-Cola system. It means that we are manufacturing, distributing, and selling Coca-Cola franchise brand in 10 countries as one of its partners. This is a unique system to the Coca-Cola business. Actually, you may not see this kind of a model in other sectors. Why? Because this model actually makes CCI on one side as a third party, kind of a third party company to the Coca-Cola company, because of receiving franchising rights and conducting the business accordingly. On the other side, having the operational responsibility in the field, in the country, we have to work with countless distributors, suppliers, and contractors who are third party to our organization. So we have been dealing with all these kind of suppliers and the third party companies. As I mentioned, we are operating in 10 countries, including Turkey, Middle East countries, Central Asia countries, and Pakistan. When we look at the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index for the year 2018, we saw the picture, unfortunately, in not a good shape. You know, all of our countries were colored in dark red, and orange. So it meant for us that we have to differentiate ourselves, regardless of the markets that we are operating in. The other players doing their businesses in these respective marketplaces. If we really believe that we are working as a responsible corporate business. This is one part. The other part is we professionals all know that many extraterritorial laws and regulations have been put in force in many countries. One way or another have impact on conduct on the business yourself. Even if you are aware of it or you're unaware of those impacts. So it means that those companies have to look at different angles conducting their business in order to provide better business environment while advocating business integrity, having high ethical standards and compliance. First layer is very obvious. You know, you need to start from yourself. You need to learn, understand, and adapt all those developments within your organization in order to improve your governance, managing your risk in a better way, fulfilling the requirements of all those laws and regulations, as well as meeting expectations of stakeholders, particularly in the capitalism 2.0 era. We said, is it enough? No, we definitely said that it's not enough, because when you look at all those well-known cases in anti-bribery, corruption, and fraudulent activities field, one can easily say that they're all one way or another related with the third party. So apart from doing homework at your firm, what should be doing additionally? We said that they're not alone. There are other companies like us, so you need to start taking action and collectively we established Ethics and Reputation Society of Turkey almost 12 years ago to create awareness on integrity, good governance, making highest ethical standards integral part of company culture. Today we have reached 160 corporate members within the organization, and in this term I'm the chairperson of the board of directors of that society. And their annual turnover is almost equal to 15% of national GDP in Turkey. So we have scale, we have chance to be heard in those fields. It might not be easy if you want to take this kind of an action on your own. So this kind of an action can be considered on the private sector. But again, is it enough? After a decade, we said, no, this is not enough either. We want to expand our perspective on compliance management through our business partners, because they are our third parties, and we have to support them if they really want to have long-term sustainable business in the context of the sustainable economic goals, and the sustainability concept. They're all small and medium sized enterprises, which are the real drivers of local economy. They might be doing business well now, but considering the fact that things have been changing rapidly and in a very speedy way in outside, those organizations should also understand that fulfilling fast-evolving compliance requirements will make them choice of preference in selection of business partners from the other end. If they do not follow that path, or if they remain unaware of the requirements of those developments, sooner or later they will be out of the game. So we've started telling this story to this group of people who are our distributors and suppliers. But how could it be done? Thanks to our colleagues, which we work together at the Ethics and Reputation Society, we came up with an idea. It was a project to support those SMEs who are in our supply chain as suppliers and distributors. We shared this project with EBRD, knowing that EBRD are also looking ways to support those SMEs to provide support to local economy. We worked a lot. We composed a project working group after having many meetings. We agreed on the outline of the project and signed a memorandum of understanding with EBRD, because these kind of projects require significant stores. We are talking about almost 3,000 distributors and suppliers only in Turkey. If we add up other countries, then it will go easily about 10,000. So it's not an easy project to be handled. It requires professional support, it requires financial support. But thanks to the EBRD, they really believe in the project. They really believe that this project will work in the best interest of the SME. And they decided to provide funds to the project. 75% of the project cost had been funded by the EBRD in the original plan. Distributors, suppliers themselves were supposed to provide the remaining 25%. But after a while, we said that no, we really believe in this project, and we will take over that cost from the distributors, our customers in the end, and we became a contributor of the project. We have concluded the first pilot phase with the 5 distributors towards the end of 2019, but unfortunately, due to COVID-19 pandemic situation, understand how they're conducting their business, how are the risks associated to their business, how you're going to design a compliance program which fits their needs actually. One size does not fit all, doesn't work here. So they take the diagnostics of the organization, produce recipe in the report, and towards the end of the project, all requirements have been met, and after the closure of the project, they will be under 1 year monitoring. The qualitative and quantitative metrics will be monitored for another year. So we are ready to move to the second word as soon as we will get green flag from the House of Trustees to the project. Both EBRD and us are so leading this project, and we also see it as a contribution to our society. You know, we touch base to the level playing ground. It is something that, like us, any company on the private sector side can do something more, rather than expecting some other companies or governmental institutes taking action. I can go into the details of the project in the second round if you like.
Thank you, Ertuğrul. Actually, your conclusion is perfect, because I was going to ask you a question which I hope you will not find provocative. It's not intended to be provocative, but what you just said about other companies, do you believe that something like that is easier to do for an international company vis-a-vis a domestic company? I mean, if Coca-Cola Turkey was a purely Turkish company, would you think that it would have been able to do the same kind of interrelation with the supply chain rather than being a multinational? You see what I mean? And again, we're talking about Turkey, but it could be Italy, France, or whatever. I wonder if the fact that the company is international cannot play a role. But let's see on that. So we ended the first round. We are a bit behind schedule, actually quite a bit behind schedule, but I think it was really fascinating. So let me pick up a few questions, and in fact, one immediately, which was asked very early on by Gemma Iolfi, and this is a question for Fernando and Tetiana. So I will ask both of you to respond and to be as sharp as possible in your responses. The question is very simple. So you undertook a lot of efforts to restore the corporate governance, the credibility, the reputation of the firm. Have those efforts been successful, in particular vis-a-vis investors and customers? And if they have been successful, what are the reasons, according to you, for that success? I notice, and again, that both companies have changed their name. Is it part of the reshaping of the company? And again, it's not to be ironic, but it may be part also of the resetting of the company. So the question to both of you, have you been successful? And then if you have also 30 seconds to respond to my question about a company which has been undertaking such a change in an environment which maybe has not really evolved in the same way, and how you can promote the changes also in the public sector. So Fernando first. You're on mute, Fernando.
I just realized. Thank you, Nicola. Yeah, I mean, Very good questions and straight to the bones, I would say. How was the reaction from customers and investors? I mean, it has been both positive and also encouraging. And as I mentioned before, I mean, these were my best allies, because they were on the side, you had the government enforcing actions, but also on the other side, the business community, investors were asking for a change, were claiming for a change. Otherwise, they would just turn you the back. And in that sense, we did lose lot of revenue during the first year and a half, 2 years. And it took about those 2 years to start to recover confidence from customers, but by showing them the results and the advancement of the programs, of the compliance program we were doing. And actually, I mean, the company operates in Chile, Peru, and Colombia. And we had over 190 enhanced due diligences. I mean, from business partners, from customers, from suppliers, in order to give us the confidence. We went to presenting our program into 137 stakeholders as well. We participated in forums, 8 forums internationally and 17 forums nationally. I mean, we were outspoken what we were doing, and we walking the talk at the same time. We regain what are the key figures for our one of the indicators, key indicators in our commercial side, which is the backlog to before crisis, and that was after 2.5 years. And on the other side, we could get new shareholders through capital share increase in 2 times. So I have to say it's not only the compliance, but taking a question that Max Berger from Austria also is pointing out. I mean, having a compliance program, complying and fighting against corruption, it pays back. It pays back for the future. And as long as you show a future, a sustainable company, I mean, you may get new investors, and you will gain as well the support from your business community. I leave the second reply, I mean, for your second question related to the name change after Tatiana, and then we bounce back, Tatiana, if you are okay.
Perfect. Tatiana, on the first part of the question about, have you managed to convince the investors and the customers that you have changed, and have you regained trust?
Well, first of all, Kevstar itself bears its name for 25 years, more than 25 years in Ukraine. And fortunately, nothing happened to reputation of Kevstar in Ukraine as a result of that scandal around Wintelcom. People do not even understand what is it about, only due to, I think, my contribution and people from Wintelcom, we tried to explain to the world, to these countries where we operate about this scandal, because we want to remediate it. On VEON and change of the name, partially it was driven by this scandal, partially not, because in that time VEON planned to launch a VEON application like WhatsApp and Viber. Unfortunately, it was not successful, so we closed this project. But the idea was to have this VEON name, VEON brand for all the group and launch this application. Partially was driven by reputation and partially not. In respect of reputation of VEON, unfortunately, after the scandal, the cost of shares never enough to the level as it was before, unfortunately, till now. it's not only as a result of scandal, but some business reasons behind it. But it is what it is. But generally, the reputation renewed and partners trust us. We cooperate with such companies as Microsoft and Google, others, multinationals. So generally, and we receive loans, a lot of loans from different well-known financial organizations. So the reputation of Vioni is good now, but unfortunately the cost of shares is not so high as shareholders expect. And with Kevstar, everything is perfect.
Okay, perfect. Tatiana, given that you have the floor, why don't you pick up on the second question? So let's be very frank, almost brutal. How easy it is to be a clean company in Ukraine today?
Well, for us, it is easy because we are really big. As I told you, we are opinion leaders. It's like more than half the population of Ukraine use our services, including public officials, public offices, and everyone. You know, we drive not only the telecommunications, but the opinion of people. And we believe that ethics and integrity and compliant culture must have in Ukrainian business. And we also expect it from authorities. Even they have no idea to ask bribes from our company, never, because they understand that they will not be successful and even could get a very negative publicity and everything, enforcement. But of course, it's not easy from the other side, as we don't see much changes in the public sector. You're right asking about these questions, how to really force them to change. Maybe they need something like monitorship from such organizations as OECD, like to give them a task, like our monitor give to our company, and then monitor fulfillment, because they only, promise when they get loans from IMF or other organizations, I mean our government, they only promise that we will fight corruption, we will. And no development, everything is so slowly.
Okay, thank you, Tatiana. Fernando, can you keep your answer quick and sharp?
Okay, actually there are two leftovers there. One is the name change you referred to. For us, it's not a name change, actually it's an identity change that comes together with asking for pardon, which we did a year ago publicly in the country, addressing a speech to many levels in the political, key opinion leaders and common citizen. And that coupled with the revamp of the mission and how we do business in the company together with implementation of the ethics and compliance program. So it comes together with the name change, because unfortunately the chairman that was allegedly involved in the illicit payments is the company name. So there is a direct link, and that tarnishes directly the reputation and keeps in mind of the people. And so it comes together with this change. Now, related to how to go in compliance in a country where we have a big contrast is a very difficult question to ask. I mean, 70% of the economy in Peru is underground. Engineering and construction, our biggest customers are not the government. Our mining companies, are infrastructure companies that do the public work or the work in very places far away from quotation mark civilization. So if you have 5,000 employees in the Andes at 4,000 meters working for you, from where you are going to get a canteen? You get from the locals. from where you're going to get the machinery, the heavy machinery to go and do your work, from where you're going to hire that. It's going to be from locals. And most of these locals are not necessarily registered. So you have to put a plan in place in order to make them register, screen them with local intelligence in order to separate what is good from not good, and then start to preach and push for the compliance portion. It's not easy, but what we have seen is that with the other kind of controls that we have put in place, we don't identify signs that would raise alerts on corruption. And but on the other side, what we have done, and we have been very successful, is in our whistleblower channel that we revamp, we regenerate, and it has seen almost a 4 times fold increase in denunciation that has helped a lot to us to improve our controls and also set the tone in the places where we are at risk.
Thank you, Fernando. I have another question from Maida Scrielli. I hope I have not too much misspelled the name of Maida. It is to Chuen, I guess, because he's formally the only MDB representative, but maybe I can also ask Gino. I know you're not an MDB, but and it is to do with carrying out proactive integrity reviews for the project you finance or for the companies in which you invest. Do you do it regularly? And if yes, what do you do with those? And let me even add an additional question: if those proactive integrity reviews really show a very substantive problem, do you consider any public statement or any public acknowledgement of that? Chuen and then Gino.
Yeah, well, the EBRD does not conduct proactive reviews in respect of integrity, the way that I think the question was framed. We do monitoring of our projects based on environmental standards, social standards, and as well as just pure performance standards, whether they're meeting up to our expectations of the project. And oftentimes, those monitoring missions do end up finding problems and irregularities that turn into investigations that then lead to sanctions. Since I am representing the MDB community, I know that a lot of our fellow MDBs do conduct proactive reviews. For instance, I know that the European Investment Bank does conduct proactive reviews. And I would just say that this is a space that is one that we're all sort of it's exploring and trying to figure out what can be the role of these reviews. So far, there have not been any reviews that have resulted in sanctions or debarment, which is our process for resolving these sorts of irregularities. But that's not to say that those won't come up in the future, because oftentimes the reviews will end up finding problems that are more related to performance or contractual breaches than they are to integrity issues. One final point is just that, in terms of incentives for compliance, I think the real inroads is not really when you found a problem, but it's before you find a problem. How do you create those incentives so that the structures are in place that they themselves can find the problems and you don't have to be an external coming in and finding those problems, which can be more difficult.
Yeah, thank you, Chuen. Gino, anything to add from your perspective? You already addressed some of it in your speech, but maybe.
I think Chuen actually made a very good point. So let me just piggyback on that, which is to say that, taking a little bit of a step back or a side step from the specific question, we we review our portfolio proactively all the time for risks, including the risks of corruption, which could fall under kind of the premise of an integrity review. We've talked at length now at how we try to impact or influence company behavior, either by setting our expectations or engaging with companies specifically, or creating incentives in terms of our capital allocation. But the third point that Yuan made, which I think is really important, is we also try to impact markets, which is to say that we demand, request better and more disclosure from companies so that the market, so that civil society, that governments, that investors like us can monitor companies as well. And I think that's really critical here. The purpose of transparency and information on company disclosure to assess these risks.
And maybe, Gino, can you respond briefly to my earlier question? In your view, how far away you are from the normal PE investor, or how close they are vis-a-vis you?
So I'm going to sidestep the question a little again. And the reason is that we're a very different type of investor, right? We are a large, diversified institutional investor. We invest, as I mentioned, in 9,000 companies, and we take a minority stake. We require that the board acts on our behalf and in our interest. You made the point earlier, the importance of corporate governance. That is really essential here with the type of investor that we are, because we look to the boards to act on our behalf. Very, very different from the way that a PE fund would invest. But in order to address the actual question that you're asking, and I think what you're trying to get at is, we see ourselves as a responsible investor. Are other investors becoming more responsible? I think is what you're trying to get at. And I think most of us probably on this call would agree that what we call ESG, environment, social governance, is becoming much more front of mind. It's an accelerating trend in terms of the importance that the investment community puts on this kind of information and assessments, and how they use it to inform their investment decisions. And I think that is an important trend, but it is maturing. You know, as an investor, we've thought about risk and return for a very long time, and it's a burgeoning area of focus to think about impact as well.
Thank you, Gino. Alice and Soji, both of you, can you? I think I asked both of you a bit the same question. You know, your experience generated interest in other exchanges? So can you tell us a bit more about it? And can you tell us also if there are? I know, for example, that NDBs are regularly interacting with exchange experiences in this area. Are there discussions like that between exchanges? I have to say that I'm completely ignorant on that.
Okay, if I may come in here, Nicola. Yes, the first interest we got was from smaller companies, that how can we have something that is not as big as the corporate governance rating system that will work for MSMEs. This also, we got an interest from the bond market as well, who wants to start to list the bonds, the companies who are receiving investments through bonds, and to say something about their governance. We also got interest of taking some of the learnings into the maritime sector, which we have done in partnership with the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network. And that work is what has generated interest internationally. So we've had requests from Ghana looking at replicating something similar. And there have been inquiries from Egypt, India, Ukraine, and Argentina as well. So, but in terms of whether or not this has made any difference, the premium board I talked about was introduced in 2015. And there was a newspaper article in 2019 saying that in the first half year of 2019, the premium board outperformed the all-share index for the first time. So the all-share index was down 4.66% in the first half year of 2019, where the premium board was up 9.17%. So the difference was seen by 2019. And this attracted new entrants like MTN Nigeria and some other big, systemically big companies in Nigeria that were not listed, who are now listing directly onto the premium board. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergi. So to pick up, Max Berger-Schleding from ICC Austria, said that this was an excellent discussion, but what about mindset changes under a heading like to increase profit, fight corruption? I think you are giving already part of the answer. Alice, has your experience generated interest?
Yes, to build on Sergi's answer, in very, very short, yes. So I think globally there's been a lot of interest. I think obviously as you move around the globe, people will have started these initiatives at earlier points. But as I said during my presentation, because of our exchange being very globally based, we're having to target all over and ensure that all of these producers and brands obviously reaching these requirements. And off the back of that, it's then causing waves down the supply chain or up the supply chain with people asking questions about these requirements and how it will affect them in the long run, I suppose. But to directly answer whether we've had engagement with exchanges, yes, we have. So we've sort of had initial discussions with some exchanges about implementing similar, if not the same, requirements. Obviously, this is very metal specific, and I suppose for very different supply chains, different procedures would have to be put in place. But if you look at sort of the overarching aims and the sort of movement of the market, it's very positive. And then I suppose the other angle of it as well is as a regulated exchange, when we do want to alter our rule book, we have to consult the market. So it means that it's a completely open book process and anyone and everyone can comment on the requirements. So before we actually released those final requirements, we had almost 2-year period where people could comment or engage with us. So that gave us a very good sort of platform to talk to all players within not just the metal market, but wider than that. So as I said before, we had banks, NGOs, we even had individual concerned citizens talking to us. We had consumers, so your car companies, bigger tech companies or beverage companies, all the way across the spectrum talking to us. And that's to ensure that the rules that we brought in were sort of fair and within sort of market demand, I suppose you could call it. But looking across the exchanges, as I said, I think a lot of them are making disclosures and some of these ESG requirements mandatory. So I think it's only a matter of time before it becomes sort of across the board. But definitely within the metals industry, a lot of positive changes coming along.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. Amanda, I asked you before if the system of certification could not maybe lead to some complacency. Let me also ask you very quickly if this has, again, trying to learn from each other, if this initiative between the private sector and the Ministry of Agriculture has raised interest in other ministries, like health, for example, which I suppose is one on the front line today in Brazil.
Thank you very much for your question. Actually, there are more ministries that are doing the same kind of incentive. And now we are also part of the management committee of the infrastructure ministry. That it's their first year doing the seal. But answering your question, the seal and the legislation took also in consideration about the certification and the concerns regarding it. Just for you to know that the greatest of this seal that it's a prediction of its validity. The seal is valid per 1 year. So if the company want to continue the stamp, the CO stamp in their products, they have to apply again and renew the CO, and they have to get it. And the prerequisites for the renewal of the CO, it's not the same if it's your first time. It's getting it's getting increasing progressively, so the company cannot show the same state they were in the first time they applied for the CO. And in this meantime, if the company that gets the CO have some problem, incurs and corruption scandal, violation of human rights or environment rights, the ministry can take off the CO as well. So these are some measures that are trying to not get this, have the COS like whitewash of and have this certification. So these are something that are already in place. And yeah, I totally agree on your statement about we are still fighting against corruption after some corruption scandals. Now, it's not preventive yet, especially maybe I can tell 100% about Brazil, but I think that mostly in Latin America, for example. But I think that also it's a door open for a cultural change, leveling the playing field for a more sustainable, competitive, and for sure a more plural economic field, because we need to break this paradigm to have this plurality as well. So actually, it's still learning on pain, but yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. Again, I don't think this is proper to Brazil. It takes indeed someone to be hit hard before things change. And again, being public, be private. Trugol, I would really like you to answer to my naive question. Is it easier to implement a supply chain program for an international company than for a pure domestic one, based on your experience?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question. It gives me a chance to explain it broadly. As I said, I'm working for CCI, not for the Coca-Cola company. It's the Kevstar. This company is a Turkish company. The majority of the shareholders belongs to another Turkish company. The Coca-Cola company only holds 20% of the shareholding, and the remaining part of the shares are being publicly traded at the Istanbul Stock Exchange market. So we can say that CCI is a Turkish company operating in the region with the culture of a multinational organization. So this request did not come from the Coca-Cola company. We want to create this project because we see it as a responsibility to our community. Why? Well, the developed markets make many imports from these companies. If you look at Turkey itself, you can see those SMEs are subcontractors or exporters of those products. And most of them will be subject to those extraterritorial regulations requirements. If they do not fulfill them, they may not be able to export their products to France or the UK or to the US. When I started practicing this field 20 years ago, when I was talking about the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, almost all of the people were criticizing me, saying that why on earth you're telling us an American law. But now many people are aware of the fact that FCPA may have impact on them, or it applies to sanctions. So learning and understanding this aspect is very vital for the local industry, for the local SME, in order to survive in the coming decade. You know, maybe this situation continue in the next decade, but for sure in the second decade, life is going to be totally different than we are living. So this is a very brief explanation to your question. It will apply to any country in any one of the continents. Sometimes it may even apply to any company in the European continent or in America. If you're producing a low margin product, because this kind of project brings you cost. While you're dealing with low margins, it may not be easy to bear the cost of additional projects like that. So offering this kind of a project with the funding of EBRD type of organization is a life-saving action for those SMEs. So this is why we believe in this project that much. And I've attended many events in new countries or in the States in compliance arenas. I haven't seen such programs. We're just talking about the policies. We're just talking about the fines, which companies will fight that. Well, in this roundtable, we're talking about sticks and carrots. Actually, this is the carrot itself. If you want to stay in the business, you need to learn, understand, and protect your organization by improving your governance and understanding and managing the risk effectively. This is what this project aims to do for you. Hope it responds.
It does, Ertuğrul. And actually, I would be interested to know if international Coca-Cola company is learning from you, but that's another question, and we don't have time. Let me end. We are only 4 minutes. Let me end with one part of the statement of Max, and with a collective question. Just to note that Max has congratulated of the speakers, and he said a lot of stick and few carrots. So, has any of you any idea of positive incentives or real incentives? Because for me, an incentive is positive. You know, that have not been really tested or not enough tested. You know, for example, I know that there have been a lot of talks at one stage about providing a particular special treatment for companies who are doing the right thing in terms of public procurement. Do you have any idea, based on your experience of, or any experience that you can share about incentives that can drive others than enforcement and externalities, can drive a company to change from within? And to get to the point made by Chu and Gino, you know, without having an external factor for doing that, but only because it is the right thing to do. Anybody who wants to take the floor? Yeah, Tatiana.
We have some examples of our business partners who substantially changed the culture. It was driven actually by us because they wanted to cooperate with us and maybe with such companies as Coca-Cola and other multinationals. And very much the changes were driven by these demands of such potential business partners. And also in M&A projects, we have some examples when our company was thinking about the acquisition of some other companies, but they are not compliant to our standards. And we have a kind of a plan in respect of the improvement. And if this improvement happens, we may come back to, you know, thinking about acquisitions. So these are, I think, kind of positive examples how we could improve our partners, impacting them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any other speaker who wants to take the floor on that? Well, if not, it's 3:59, and I think we are quite right on time. I really would like to thank all the speakers. There is a lot to be said. We touched already a lot of ground, much more than I expected, and I really would like to thank all the speakers for their introduction, but also for their engagement and for the variety of experiences that they share with us. Olga, you have a lot of food for thought in your basket. Now up to you to find the right incentives and promote the business integrity. I would like to thank also all the participants for their question and their interaction. And I invite you to continue to follow up on the initiatives of the OECD. And if I can give a very concrete suggestion for those who are interested in SMEs, I really will encourage everyone to look at this self-assessment toolkit that has been developed by the OECD. I find it super concrete, super useful. I mean, we always say that international organizations are not very good at talking to SMEs, which is true. But I think this tool is really very well designed for SMEs, wherever they are located. I know it was developed in the context of Southeast Asia, but for me, it is really a tool that should be fulfilled by all SMEs, and it can provide a lot of food for thought. With that, all of you, Gino, Ertugrul, Fernando, Alice, Titania, Amanda, Chuan, and Soji, and Deputy Secretary General Brooks, and Olga, bye-bye, and thank to ZZ Tech, which is not a RAP group, but it's only the OECD technical people. Thank you very much for their support on that. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Nicola. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.